Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Pert Near Outdoors podcast. This is your host, Billy, and this week we are posting up our live podcast that we did last week on Wednesday night with John Teater from Whitetail Landscapes, Ben Williams from Old Tin Cup Habitat Restoration, and our dear Dallas Kirsch. The four of us got on and did a live Q&A. Jimbo was in the background covering the chat board as we went through the show. And had a great conversation, and I think some very valuable information will come out of this discussion to help you better understand some of this stuff, or maybe connect some of the dots, or help you come up with some ideas of things you can do on your property, especially right now as we're heading into the midsummer, towards late summer, and getting ready to plant some of those fall food plots. So hope you enjoy the discussion. Hope you take away some good knowledge from this, and if you don't already, make sure you follow John and Ben. Both of those guys are local New Yorkers here with a lot of information and very open to interacting with you to answer your questions if you have them, and even come out to your property and do some plans for you. So make sure to check those guys out and support them. We appreciate them helping us here at Pert Near Outdoors put these shows together, and overall just be a resource for us as well. So thank you, everybody, and we will be coming out with another episode maybe later this week or beginning of next. While we were brewing over here at Windy Brew, which is where I'm recording this intro right now, we did a podcast quick to kind of update exactly what's going on with the brewing of the beer and what we have happening for the event on August 22nd. So very much looking forward to that. I think we've got a good event planned. Hopefully raise some good money for the Venison Donation Coalition and the National Deer Association, and overall just have a great time for everyone in attendance. So thank you all very much. Have a great week, and keep feeding them.
Hello.
Yeah, that's your
Yeah.
name.
Squirrels got me.
Big Jim.
Yeah.
Really cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
That's good that you think of it, because that's what deer hunting typically is cold and fun.
Yesterday morning, I'm glassing up on the pass, and I see these deer moving, and I'm like, ooh, there's some deer moving. All of a sudden, I just see this person just head down, just hauling ass, wearing shorts and a t-shirt with a pack on. And I'm like, is that Tard? My dad always talks about floating through the woods like the autumn breeze.
So Robert's
When you're
the
275
ghost,
pounds, I don't know how you do that, but
the Freightliner. It's just like a creeper. You're just kind of up in the corner watching what's going on down there.
yeah.
You know,
He's like,
he's up there slapping it, pissing all over everything.
is it warm yet?
How did you know the name of the actor?
That's I know.
What'd you say his name?
Hervé Villechaize. Remember this?
You know what pert near means.
If you know what pert near means and you live in America, you're a redneck too.
Welcome to the Log Talk Podcast, brought to you by Pert Near Outdoors.
Sod. It works good in sod.
Okay.
So anything that you want to have relatively soft ground so you can sink into. But I mean, it worked pretty good on hard ground too. It just gets a little bouncy with rocks or whatever.
What do you think it would do through like a fairly heavy mat of we'll just say winter rye?
Yeah. No, that's what I'm really eager to find out. But unfortunately, I'm not going to know that until next spring.
You ought to just bring it up to my place then.
We can do that. That's fine if you want to do that. If you want to try planting some fall stuff into it, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm in a tight spot right now with my fall food plots, at least because of just the volume of rain and what took and didn't take. This whole system that I've got, it becomes a little bit more complicated when you introduce different plants. So,
yeah,
which we can talk about today, which is interesting.
Yeah. Did you get a ton of rain like we did?
Yeah, I bet you. I mean, I don't know what the total rain percentage is, but you walk on my fields and they're not that bad, which again is an indicator of just the quality that I'm working with.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I've turned it around pretty well. You go on the other farm fields, they're a mess. Mine are not.
Yeah. Yeah, you're getting good water infiltration.
Big time. Yeah, it's a game changer. The OG on these air plots now are 6%. I mean, that's unheard of in any area. I've built it up over these years with not tilling, and that's really been the 6% is, I think most of these farm fields are probably right around 3.5, maybe 3 to 3.5.
Organic matter, you talking?
Yeah, OG on those, and it's a game changer.
Well, I'm using old cow pastures that have never been tilled, and we had some soil samples done last year, and one of them's 15% organic matter. The other one's 12.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
I just looked at it yesterday. I had a 15 and a 12, and then I even had like a 9, and that was on stuff that had been corn soybean rotation, but it never really been tilled. It had only been zone tilled.
Yeah, cool.
But
wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, if you want to use the planter, what you should do is come out here. We'll hook up. Well, I'll take you around and show you everything I got going on, and then we can see if we can do something as far as the corn.
I'd be interested. Yep, yeah, I'd be interested. Okay,
I'd like to have you out anyways. So if you want to do that,
yeah, we'll see. I might have something out your way with a presentation. We'll see.
Yeah,
nice.
Might be doing a gig for QDMA.
Sweet. All right. Well, we've got some people tuned in. Haven't heard. I don't think any of us have heard back from Ben.
Text him.
Maybe he's planting food plots or something. So we got Big Jim. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry for the technical difficulties. All of the faces here, if you've been following along with us, should look familiar. So we've got John Teater with us from Whitetail Landscapes out of Tully, New York. So John, thanks for jumping on. We got Uncle Dallas. Uncle Dallas, how are you? I like your plain gray tee. It looks awesome. And Big Jim is with us as well. He does not have his camera on, or it's covered up or something. Or maybe he doesn't want us to see his hair or something along those lines. So the goal for this discussion here is to kind of just have a Q&A, straight up answering questions, and try to just talk about what we're all. Oh, there he is. Hi, Big Jim.
What's up?
Just talk about what we've got going on right now as we approach the end of July and looking at the beginning of August, when we should be starting to do our work in the fields to get our fall plots going. So I guess to kind of just get things going, Jimbo, you had asked a question of the guys on the Instagram poll that I put up earlier today, and that was, I guess you can ask your question directly, and then we can kind of dive into that, and I'm sure we'll kind of spin out as we dive into those questions.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Jim?
I'm having some serious lag issues over here.
Okay.
So why don't you just read my question off so I get all messed up?
Roger. So Jimmy's question was in regards to what are you spraying on your plots that you've already got established that you're trying to control the weeds that are growing in them? I believe that's kind of the gist of what Jimmy's question was, what are you spraying? What's the stuff that you're putting on the ground to knock down any of the weeds that are growing up within your plots? So I know it's a fairly simple question, but John, I'll kind of let you field that. So envision that we have a food plot like we have up in the hardwoods that's mainly a mixture of clover, and I think we had some rye planted in there that you had guided us on last year, and that Jimmy cast it out. So what do you recommend to treat that as we move throughout the summer here?
A lot of time in clover plots, you're kind of dealing with grass infiltration, and that's just based upon usually the excess or residual nitrogen that is not being consumed by the plant matter. Typical chemicals folks use, clethodim, arrest slayer. Those are alternative. But basically, it's a grass select herbicide. That's 99% of what you're going to see in most food plots. So let me give you another little tidbit on that. I typically mow all my food plots. There's been studies that have come out recently. You lose, and on a per acre basis, I think it's like 600 pounds of food per acre when you mow. Some generic number or something like that. I don't like spreading herbicides. In fact, I've kind of been a preacher of that for some period of time. Some of the herbicides have a longer shelf life, like 2,4-D has a 3 to 4 week period of time, not shelf life, period of time where it doesn't dissolve or become less resident in the soil. That eliminates or reduces a lot of microbial activity. Now, glyphosate Roundup has less impact on the soil. That will kill set back most plants. Basically, what it does is it cuts off the root to the plant. It doesn't allow for nutrient exchange. That's really kind of the simpleton example. My basic and best recommendation for anybody that's dealing with food plots, if you're dealing with a monoculture food plot, the best thing you can do is to identify the plant that's infiltrating. Lamb's quarter is a good thing, and I've got lamb's quarter in my corn. Figure out what that plant is and figure out, you can Google this, just Google what the herbicide application. What you're going to find is you got to buy a lot of herbicide to deal with that specific issue. That's where I would start at any food plot. Monocultures are really easy to manage in that respect, okay? But you got to remember, when you apply herbicide, you're going to slow down the microbial activity, which is going to hurt the plants that are resident. So there's kind of this weighting in both those. So hopefully that gets you to an answer, but identify the plant and the related herbicide. Guys like Ben and I know Ben's not on right now, email us, we're able to help. I've helped, I can't tell you how many people not only identify the plant, and identify the herbicide to apply to that plant. And, a lot of times I got charts on my walls and I'm referring back to those. And, some of the specific expenses that you're going to apply on herbicides are much too expensive. And side note, I bought a propane torch. It's like a blowgun that I've been burning herbicide, or I've been burning plants with, instead of applying herbicide. So I'm going through my corn, I'm killing the lamb's quarter with a blowtorch. Great idea, right? Didn't cost me hardly anything. Just don't hit the corn. So that's a good other recommendation. Hand pull things, you can hand pull them. Mowing, I think, works great. A lot of guys are dealing with thistle. I mow thistle, let it come back up and pull it out with my hand.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, so it does, for sure. Yeah, Dallas.
When you asked that question, did you mean just trying to eliminate the crops from last fall in order to put your new food plots in, or are you talking about a perennial clover plot that you want to eliminate weeds out of and keep the clover growing?
Jimmy, you can answer that. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Your question.
My question was more along the lines of like, what can you use that won't damage your perennials, your clover and stuff like that, when you got a plot going like that and it's, getting weedy, maybe some weeds are taking over, how can you combat that?
In the regards to that, we've got a question from Mike Kulkin. I think that's how he says his last name. How do you say that? Clethodin? Is that how you say that? You guys would know better than me.
Yeah.
So he's asking, is that available in New York? He said, I've largely stopped spraying and don't mow either, finding that the critters are eating most of the weeds too. So I think that almost kind of goes to what you had posted something today, John, or maybe it was yesterday, an Instagram video, an IGTV video showing your habitat and what you're doing in your fields, where you've got just such a mixture of so many different things. And I think that's becoming more of a popular approach to things, and it has a lot of benefits to the wildlife, right?
Yeah, I think monocultures of crops, the old adage that those were the beneficial kind of decisions are not anymore. I think people are evolving to recognizing that plants, just like trees, they work together, and it's how to make these companion crops kind of function in a good uniform environment. And that's what I'm creating. We talk about organic matter and its benefit. You build organic matter based on crop residue and excretions of microbials or microorganisms in the soil. And that is the food source for the entire kind of little bioecosystem or botany in the ground. And really, that's been a huge evolution for me starting 6 years ago doing this. And, you know, I've gone the traditional route. I'm not saying don't utilize, you know, synthetic fertilizer. You can utilize it in small quantities. It just doesn't necessarily get you to the end game. And I'll throw this out there. I planted corn this year, and I was just talking to my seed guy, and he called me and he watched my video, and he said, you know, the corn needs a little bit of nitrogen, and I know that. And I said, you know, I've got a little bit of nitrogen. I put on about, I would say maybe 7 or 8 pounds per acre, like a limited amount of nitrogen. We've had, I don't know how many inches of rain here. Timing could have been better. It's got contain on it, so, you know, it wouldn't volatilize, but I'm telling you, the corn looks fantastic. And that's just throw and grow corn. I mean,
that's pretty awesome.
And that's not even, that's just in my backyard. The soil here is far less superior to the soil on my own property. You know, I can tell you right now, I would not be surprised if I could grow 175 bushels on an acre up there. The quality soil is that great. That's why I bought that property, because I knew the soil would be good. And so when you're buying your property, think about the soil. It all boils back down to soil, managing soil, everything across the whole board.
And so speaking of soil, Dallas, I mean, how are you feeling about, you know, we kind of started on this journey about this time last year with John. You know, I guess you had kind of started some of the practices last spring, but, you know, we're about a year in and getting ready to start working on our fall plots. And, you know, what are you seeing out there, you know, in the field on the property?
Yeah, I mean, we just we started, you know, so we had our old food plots that were corn soybean rotation that Dad was planting, and he was taking care of the soil to the point where he could grow corn and soybeans. But you know, we started opening up all these new food plots in the old pasture land, and you can just see that it's good fertile soil. We had some tests done last year. Organic matter is high, nitrogen was good. So we started a little bit of throw and grow. You know, we did some buckwheat last year and a couple of new plots, and then we did some brassicas and winter wheat and some annual clovers as well. So started getting into the fall food plot rotation. But anyways, this spring when we got the corn planter and we started planting corn and soybeans, and we put corn and soybeans into the old corn and soybean ground, and then we did that field, the lower field, which had been never tilled, never had any sort of monoculture planted in it. And we just had a lot of brassicas growing in it last year. And that corn is chin high right now. That stuff's phenomenal. All the stuff in the old corn soybean ground is struggling. I mean, the corn is, I don't know if it's ever going to put an ear on it. You know, it's knee to thigh high. It's somewhat yellow. It lacks nutrients. But the ground there on the old corn soybean monoculture ground is just, you know, right now it doesn't look too bad because we've had about 12 inches of rain. But, you know, when I walked up to it a couple of weeks ago, it was like a concrete slab and there's huge cracks in it. So it's as opposed to going down into the other places where I planted some soybeans in a new plot on June 30th. Into sod, and there was some brassicas growing there last year too, but that's the corn planter just sunk right in and just laid those soybeans right in exactly the way it needed to be. And at the same time, I could have walked up to those other plots and, you know, barely could have probably sunk a shovel into them. And so I'm already seeing the benefits of no-till, cover crops, trying to keep something growing in the soil 365 days a year, limiting herbicide and fertilizer. I mean, we've never fertilized. I did just put a little bit of liquid nitrogen on that corn last week, just on the bad ground, not on the good stuff. I just left that be. So, I mean, we've already seen the benefits of soil just being left alone, basically, and just plant diversity. Don't till it. Don't get carried away with your fertilizer, your inputs, basically. Try to as little input as you can. We're already seeing the benefits of that.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, Hannah Smith, welcome to the show.
Guest appearance.
Yeah, you are hideous.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So what did I miss other than the start of the whole thing?
That's pretty much it.
We're over, Ben. You missed the whole thing, man.
We struggled to get started. So Ben's on. Jim, do you want to back out, or do you want me to back out? What do you want to do?
Whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter to me. I can kind of keep track in the back and make sure we don't miss anything if you want. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Turn your video off, and then Ben, you can turn your video on.
So let's just pull in the thread a little bit with Dallas, right? Because Dallas he's hitting on this topic that's really important. I'm going to just kind of give a brief example. So I try not to till the soil, right? And I think that's been kind of this mantra that we talked about earlier. Tillage introduces oxygen, right? Oxygen depletes organic material, okay? And organic material is the foundation of the house. And let's consider the organic material itself a home. If you rip the roof off a home, it doesn't become a home anymore, right? It degrades. So the more tillage or destruction to that home, the less opportunity for those organisms that live in that environment to kind of sustain themselves and survive. Plants exude sugars. Sugars feed bacteria and fungus. Fungus connect plants. Fungus and bacteria exude food in various sources. And that is the feeder to the basic plant life. It's really that simple. Destruction of the home destroys really the opportunity for some of those microorganisms to produce the food for the plants. So when you get into a synthetic system, you're dealing with fertilizers and you're dumping fertilizers in the ground, the plants become accustomed. Plants don't give a crap where they're getting their food from. And fertilizers it's food, right? The bacteria is the first to kind of attach to that fertilizer, and it produces food that the plants consume. Again, plants don't care where they're getting it from. But then what happens is there's an abundance of fertilizer, and usually it's nitrogen. People typically overapply nitrogen or phosphorus for that matter. We talked about that in another podcast that we had together. And the reason I bring this up is too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, too much potassium is a bad thing. You create this environment where everything is artificial. You're artificially supporting the plant life with fertilizer. And what we're saying is you don't need to do that. So to Dallas's point, I think to simplify stuff, and this is how I look at it really simply, if you're going to apply a fertilizer, do it in small amounts and you'll get a lot better return. It's not that I'm saying don't apply a fertilizer. I don't want to spend $19 on a bag of urea. I'm just cheap. And then you got to put what, 200-300 pounds on it. I'm not going to spend $200-300. Now I'll spend additional money on seed, right? I'm spending $400 on seed for the fall right now across multiple. That's a fair amount of money. Then on top of that, I have to spend $400 or $500 on fertilizer. It just everything adds up. So how can we do it cheaper and better? And what I've said is you don't need fertilizer. And that's the point I'm trying to get at.
I like it. And so we're talking, the whole point of this is managing the quality of your soil to get the most out of what you're doing. So we had a question in the live chat about, where do you get your soil tested? That was from Jill. So can you I know both Ben, I'll give you the floor, Ben, since you haven't had a chance to talk yet. What's the easiest way to get your soil tested? Where do you go? What do you do?
So I guess it all depends on where you are locally, but I've had good success with the Whitetail Institute ones that you send away. You can get them like PSC, runnings, everything like that. They're pretty good. Some local like feed stores and co-ops also have, you can send it out. You can send it to Cornell if you want to send it there. There's varying prices and all kind of what you're looking for. My kind of go-to has always been kind of the Whitetail Institute stuff. pH, all your macros, they get your cat ion exchange, everything like that's right on there. So that's not a hateful one. I think they're about $15, I think is what they retail for right about now. So that's kind of been my go-to over the last couple of years.
Yep. And Alice, that's what we did last year, right? We collected a couple bags of dirt from around the farm, the different areas we wanted to work, and then we sent it off to Whitetail Landscapes, right? Or sorry, Whitetail Institute. Yeah.
Yeah, we mailed
soil sampler.
Yes. And just take care of it, John, would you?
Yeah.
So,
I guess the one thing to mention there is the soil sample thing. Is there's a bunch of different options for soil samples, and I think Ben was saying macro micronutrients. You should evaluate all those, and then working with a consultant like Ben and I to kind of help you discern importance of that as it applies to the typical crop. But really, if you're focused on two things, it's soil pH, the buffer related to that, so buffer, and then the related, so how quickly you can change the pH, right? That's a symptom of CEC, the type of soil that you're dealing with. And then part two would be just the OG, like we're talking organic matter that we're talking about earlier. Can you build that organic matter up to a level that's, significant? If you take a woods food plot or a woods area and turn it into a food plot, the organic matter that's resident in there is associated more than likely with the decomposing material, leaf litter, right? All the decomposing branches and sticks and leaf litter, and you're going to find a high organic matter in those particular areas in most instances. Now, that's not all instances, so you got to go back to your soil. And the type of soil really dictates where you want to put these food plots. So guys just like, I want to use a landing zone, or I want to use this area. No. We need to look at the soil first before we make those decisions. And I think that really is kind of the critical thing. And like Ben said, get a soil test. Like that's a simple no-brain action, and it doesn't cost you hardly anything.
okay. Yeah. Step one. So know what you're working with. And so I want to come back around to the cleth, as they call it. Dave Folkrod had that was one of his questions prior to the live, and I asked him if we answered his question. He said not really, kind of, sorta. He's wondering. He says cleth doesn't touch the weed issues he's having, and Roundup puts a hurting on his clover. Says I have Ladino, medium red, and chicory in those plots, and he's getting ready to overseed. He's getting ready to overseed with turnips and soybeans into them come September, and he's saying he's going to be adding rye. So really, he's just wondering if there's, other than mowing and spraying of the chemicals, do you guys have any other ideas on how to control some of the weeds in that are growing up in his established clover plots?
Is he 100% that it's grass? Because I had a person that reached out to me a couple years ago. It was actually popcorn plantain, which has a very similar narrow leaf, also called narrow leaf plantain, is a very narrow leaf, almost mimics a grass, and cleth won't touch it because it's a broadleaf weed. Also, it could be something like a set grass, sometimes anything like that, or perennial grasses, cleth doesn't hit them hard. It's more based on those annual grasses or just peeping grasses. If they're established grasses, it's going to take multiple sprayings or mowing at the correct time with it. So, I just double check, make sure it's the right type of plant you're trying to kill with your chemical application in that instance. But a lot of that you can control it pretty easily as long as you don't have an overabundance of weeds and just mowing routinely.
Okay. It's good feedback. So just confirm exactly what it is that you're battling there in the food plot before you go crazy with any of that stuff.
Yeah, and let's be clear about something. So if that Folklord's promoting, he's going to have a broadcast plant. So you got to kind of go back for a second. Let's forget weeds for a second, right? You've got an established food plot, and there's perennial mixes in there, okay? Those perennial mixes are supposed to survive for some period of time. If you're going to put an annual mix in there, it's going to compete with the perennial mix. So you need to kind of break up what your strategy is. Are you having a perennial food plot or an annual food plot? So separate the perennial from the annual. If you're dealing with weeds, like in a clover chicory situation, depending on what the weed is, typically folks, and I think it's expensive, and there is a generic herbicide I can't think of offhand. The non-generic is Raptor, and I think that goes for a few $100s a gallon. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to broadcast seed into a perennial food plot and hope for production. That's usually not going to work unless you terminate everything in that food plot. So my recommendation is to not like either start over and get in an annual cycle, at least on a portion of that food plot. So you're kind of getting into a better cycling of plants. You got your cool season plants, which you're focused on, and you get warm season plants. You get your perennials and your annuals. You kind of got to break it down on what you're trying to achieve in these food plots. And there's different, with my clients, I break down, okay, what's a warm season plant? What's a cool season plant? Okay, what's a perennial? What's an annual, right? And then I will interseed some biannual plants like medium red clover into my food plots for the wintertime. And then they eventually phase out. And then I'm going into a 60, 90, 110-day blend in the summertime to fight off those warm season plants. So, I want to get that across because it's a little bit more involved than, hey, I want to apply an herbicide. What are you trying to do?
Got it. I think that's a great point, John. Does anybody else have anything to tag on that, or we good to move along?
Yeah, I like John said, you just got to iron out what you're really trying to do with that. Just kind of put seed on the equation and try to pick the herbicide on.
Hey, Ben, your like microphone's not great. I don't know if you got something blocking it up or.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Sorry, must have been just turned a little bit. Yeah, definitely. Like I said, take it back to like step one, like John said with it, and figure out what direction you're really going with it. Otherwise, it's not gonna pan out just throwing seed at it or just throwing chemicals at it. I take it right back to the basics, like John said, 100%.
Yeah, I think Ben and I will answer your question specifically if you send either one of us an email or both of us an email, and then send us a picture of your food plot, what you're dealing with, and him and I can provide you recommendations on what to spray, and then maybe we can help you figure out, what you're trying to get out of it. I mean, I know Ben and I would do that for you. So talking for you, Ben.
All right. Bo Hunt seems like maybe somebody that knows you, John. He's looking to do some planting of rye grain this year. He said, what do you do with rye in the spring and summer? So I'm guessing when he says, what do you do with it? I'm guessing, how do you plant it, or how do you get yourself prepared to plant it? Is this a time to do it, or would you be doing it early in the spring?
So my model, and I'm messing around with this more so, is I bought about, I'll say, 3 bushels full of winter rye, and I'm layering winter rye. I'm not totally doing the Jeff Sturgis model, and I want to be clear about that, but I do like the concept of layering winter rye at certain times of the year. I will put a small portion of winter rye down just to fill the void and be a buffer plant as I go into my fall season. So right now in my own food plot, it's a 90-day food plot. So it's going to be sustainable for the deer based on the blends that I have for 90 days. It'll reach maturity around 90 days, which puts me somewhere in the middle to end of August, at least the time frame that I planted it. At that point, it's absolutely the perfect time to apply, certain percentage of winter rye. Those plants will survive and basically carry into the spring months, and they'll be a source of food. The one thing with winter rye is it puts on a lot of biomass. And so that becomes a slight issue for me because it tends to bolt way faster than triticale. And it's a plant that I find a little bit more difficult to deal with biomass wise, volume material wise, when I roller crimp. So I'm more inclined to use wheat or triticale, some percentage of cereal rye. And I know Ben uses it too. So, Ben, what do you typically do?
So that's where I kind of lean a little bit more on the wheat side of things, because right now, if you've been watching any of my YouTube stuff and everything, that wheat is hitting a big protein bump, hitting a big nutrient bump right now. And the deer, turkeys, even the squirrels, I even talked about in one of my videos, are really starting to utilize those seed heads. And then because that's providing such a good, essentially weed-free base, because I have, some biennial clovers like you talked about, medium red or crimson mixed in with it, shading out that plot, almost acting like a smother, I guess you'd call it. I'll roll that down. And then if I was to terminate it, I haven't got the chance to build a crimper like John has. That thing's pretty sweet. But then I would roll that down once or twice with a packer, get it nice and flat, get a spray on it, and then I could broadcast right into that with my fall mix here coming up. And that's doing a couple things. That's feeding right through the kind of late summer here. That springtime, it was good forage coming up on the spring green up. And then it kind of loses its palatability, but the natural habitat really takes over in that time frame. And then this kind of also provides some good nutrition in this time of the year, and then transitions into a good place where I have a weed-free base. I can get away with only like one spraying on a food plot a year, basically. If I got buckwheat going in, let's just say when I planted that back in like June, I only sprayed to terminate those weeds that came up. Buckwheat will smother everything out, and then I'll just double roll the buckwheat, and that kills it good enough. You don't have to get a second spray on it 3 times if you want to be safe. Roll it north to south and then like east to west, just cross hatch it. And then same thing with the weed. I'll roll it down and then just get one termination spray. Let that clover die out, release the nitrogen back in the soil. It's fixed on the nodules, and you're ready to go for your fall plant broadcast.
Okay. And then just to close out on Bo's question, he replied to that and said that he was actually, he's wondering, so you've planted this fall, the rye that is, and then in the spring, when you're ready to plant your spring plots to going into the summer, are you spraying that to kill off that rye, or what are you doing?
I mean, I am not. I'm just crimping it. So I'm waiting to a certain point in time where I feel like it reaches a point of production where it's ready to terminate. But I'm also looking at the volume of biomass in concert with, I mean, there's a bunch of factors that I look at before I make the decision to crimp. You crimp too early, you don't get the volume of biomass that will cover the resident seed. It doesn't create that weed mat that you want. You crimp too late, and it becomes way too semi and decomposes at too slow of a rate. So you kind of got to find this balance where it doesn't get too carbon based, where it will decompose at a pretty set rate. And there's a kind of an art to that, or a timing to that. If you're going to get into that system, you better be able to be resident on the land quite often to check. I'm fortunate my land's 1 mile from my house, but if you're not, maybe that system isn't right for you. The last thing I'll say is it's really good to have plants that you've planted throughout the year. So you're controlling, this is a function of controlling what normally will germinate in those areas. The idea that you're just putting on, a fall plot really gives you all these weeds you have to deal with, and you have to terminate those with a whole bunch of herbicide applications. And again, like we talked earlier, that's not good for the soil, depending on what herbicide you apply. But it basically sets you back. And what we're trying to do is continue to recycle plants, right? Continue to promote microorganism development within the soil, and allow the plants to stay connected. And just like the trees, they kind of need that whole system to be fully functional. And really, if you start to plan, you'll get to the place where you're picking the right plants. And obviously, in this case, some of my clients, right, they have a specific set of criteria based on their particular soils of what to plant and how to cycle nutrients based on their specific situations. So you got to look at the type of soil that you have and the resident plants. Like if you have clay soil, you really want fibrous rooting plants, right? Which are grasses that helps break up the soil. I actually wouldn't, on clay soil, I would be more inclined to till clay soil. I would aerate clay soil more so than I would sand soil. I would never till sand soil. But I also wouldn't want to buy a property that has a lot of clay soil or just sandy soil. I mean, so, but sometimes you're kind of stuck with what you got. So, okay.
All right. We were talking a little bit about wheat, and I assume we're talking buckwheat. Seems like, I guess there's probably multiple types of wheat, but buckwheat seems to be growing in popularity. It's something that we've really started using a lot on our family farm. And So that's something I kind of want to talk about real quick before we go into another question. This is the time of year we're looking at our buckwheat starting to shoot up. It's starting to really develop. And that's how we're going to be getting our fall plots into the ground, is by planting over that buckwheat and then killing that so that tips over and creates that layer for those fall plots to grow up through. So I want to kind of have a little bit of a conversation here on what's going on with buckwheat, because I'm seeing it's becoming a craze. It seems everybody's kind of leaning on it. So I don't know which one of you guys want. If Dallas, you haven't said much, if you want to jump on this.
Couple things there, back to your point about the wheat. John and Ben were talking about winter wheat, so cereal grain that they're planting in the fall, and then they're terminating it in the summertime somewhere. So and just to back up on that last point about rye too, wheat and rye are an alternative to one another, but there are a couple other ways to terminate in the summer. John mentioned roller crimping. That's probably the best way to terminate any kind of plant in the summer. But if you don't have that option, if you let your rye or wheat get tall, you can try rolling it and spraying it. That'll work. You can also mow it. That does create some different problems, but just as long as we're talking about other ways to terminate that crop. Another thing you can do is in June, when it's buckwheat time, your rye or wheat is going to be a lot smaller. So you should be able to terminate that with glyphosate spraying. So just as alternate ways to be able to do that kind of stuff. So that kind of rolls into the next point about buckwheat, is that usually 7 to 8 weeks before you want to plant your fall plot, you plant buckwheat. And buckwheat is a smother crop. It's not really a food plot for the deer. In some areas, they'll eat it, but around us where we have corn and soybeans and alfalfa, they're not going to eat the buckwheat. So you plant a thick mat of that stuff. It grows up tall. It shades out all the weeds. And then in your early August time frame, whenever you want to plant your fall plots, you can just broadcast into your buckwheat. Then you roll your buckwheat down and terminate it either by, what we did last year is we just lawn rolled it one time and laid it down really nice. And then I went and hit it with glyphosate. Ben just brought up the idea that you can maybe do it by rolling it a couple times in different directions. So that might be something to try this fall too, to avoid having to use that, the herbicide. So I don't know if anybody else, that's just kind of the introduction to the way we're using buckwheat, if anybody else wants to pick up on that.
So you guys see the pictures I just put up there?
Yeah,
so just to give a visual for anybody that's watching and following along, kind of what it looked like before, what it looked like after, and that was just with a regular old lawn roller. So it worked really good, and that plot came up really nicely after that all died off.
One thing to consider is, what is the maturity period of buckwheat? How long does it last, right? If you're planting it into an existing crop, so you're planting ahead, you're crimping, you're rolling, and then you're applying, that particular plant, how does it last before it reaches the stage of seed production? It could be 45 days, it could be 60 days. Where does that put you in the time frame of your next planting? I don't plant monocultures of buckwheat. I think it's fine to do that. I think there's better options. And the reason I say that is, I don't like the duration of buckwheat solely alone. If you get an oat or a pea in combination of that, now you got a broadleaf plant, which is the buckwheat, you got a grass, and you got a legume, and they work in concert with each other. It tends to slow down the microbial activity, which more microbial activity, the better that decomposition of roots will be. That'll feed the next plant. So buckwheat is a great plant, great smother crop. Do not plant it in the fall. It terminates very quickly when you have a frost, but it definitely is a good recommendation. Guys double crop buckwheat. I worked with a client this year where we double crop buckwheat. The deer consume the buckwheat like crazy. He's got a concentrated deer population because where he's located. And I see buckwheat consumed a lot of times in very mountainous areas or forested areas. I think it's a good crop. It's a phosphorus scavenger. It'll do well at attracting insects, bees, those type of things. So it'll propagate well. It'll produce seed. You can let it go to seed and let it produce, and then, oh my goodness, now you've got free seed. That's another option for you as well. So, it's the window for what it survives for, or when it reaches maturity, that's I'm critical of. And I think it's a good option. I think it could be complemented better with other plants.
Anything to wrap around on that, Ben?
Yeah, I've always leaned on buckwheat for, like I said, a soil builder, poor conditions, minimum tillage stuff. It'll grow. I put a picture up online. It grew. It's growing in the battery box of my four-wheeler. I mean, it's a real hardy plant, for that. But one thing I would recommend with the lawn roller is you're going to have to, if you're using that kind of application, you're going to have to spray it. You're not getting that crushing that you would get with a roller crimper, or when I was talking about rolling, it's kind of called the packer. So it's got the ribs on it, and then because of that crushes that.
Microphone, Ben.
Microphone?
Yeah, it's your damn beer can. Get the freaking beer can out of the way.
Beer can's over there.
Jesus.
But anyway.
Now we can hear you great.
We were hearing in you, but you were kind of fading in and out.
Gotcha. So with the lawn roller, you're going to have to follow up with a spray, with the roller crimper, or with the cultipacker. Doing twice with the cultipacker, you're going to get more of that crushing application to terminate it and stuff like that. That's only kind of a wraparound I'd have on it. Other than that, I've never, when I've spring planted buckwheat or early summer planted it, I've never added like a bean or a pea like John suggested with it. Maybe that's something I'll throw into the mix next year and definitely try out, because it does make a lot of sense to have, supporting plants and stuff like that working with each other for sure.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Mm-hmm. Next question is kind of away from the farm fields and maybe more of a woods scenario with some throw and grow. So Russ Henches is wondering, when do you guys feel is too late to try to do something with in the woods with throw and grow? Some sort of a small plot that you might just be kind of raking up the leaves and kind of roughing the ground up and then just hand broadcasting some stuff in the woods. What's your guys' thoughts on throw and grow plots?
Sunlight.
Yeah, sunlight.
Your biggest limiting factor with it. Also, be hesitant to plant. I've seen it before on client pieces where they plant every square inch of a logging road system on their property, which is in turn their access. And if you guys have all heard me, I'm a broken record. Access is everything. With that. So that's also something to think about. But I guess just a quick thing, I've planted annual clovers and cereal grains right on October 1. I've skipped the hunt that morning and put in plots that morning. So, I mean, you can plant it right up into October, bearing your grow zone. I mean, but you can plant Labor Day easily. I've broadcasted, I've talked about them before, outlaw plots into like farmer standing soybeans where it's appropriate as soon as those leaves start to tinge off in September. It's not really ever too late, really, in kind of the northern half, as long as you're using the right plants. And please don't buy a throw and grow ryegrass bag. Go buy a bag of rye grain and some red clover or crimson clover and do it that way.
Wait, what did you call it? I got to go back. You said outlaw plots?
Yeah. Outlaw plots, man. I've been doing outlaw plots on, specifically my grandmother's farm, 2009. I think I started doing that, throwing grains into the soybeans. It was brassicas at first. They don't really get big enough. But you could put a carpet of grains down in a standing soybean field right around your stand location specifically, or a nice reasonable distance from them.
So you're just saying when you say outlaw, you're just saying into the existing farm field?
Yeah.
I love that.
Some farmer's field, yeah. Right.
Yeah, just throwing in the random farmer's field,
Yeah.
I love that.
It's a great place to go with the spotlight.
I've done that, the last couple of years. And the thing is for me is it turned out to be more of a cover crop than it was a hunting plot, because you couldn't really notice too much of the grain growth until the spring. So the timing of that's important, because I don't know, if you wait until the soybeans yellow, you're already into October or the beginning of October. So I don't know, in my experience, I didn't really get much green until the spring. So I don't know if you should or what. It'd be nice to be able to do it September 1 instead of October with the grains.
Yeah, it's with that farm field, I guess, too. I guess everything, like John said, you got to be out there looking at your fields and knowing your situations. That's always been early ground because it's dry. So the beans going early. So they run an earlier category bean too. So they are typically yellowing off right about Labor Day. So it worked out timing perfect. Whereas with your situation, might be a little bit wetter ground, something they don't get to first off. Hence the bean leaves yellowing up in October. So yeah, that's a great point, Dallas, with that.
Yeah, if you can do it Labor Day, I think it's a great option. And I would say most farmers are going to let you do it, even if you don't own the ground, because all you're doing is putting in a free cover crop for them. If you offer to buy the grain and spread it for them, they'll have an awesome cover. Because especially now on the flip side, if it's a farmer that's doing cover crops, then they're going to do it for you. So. But if they're not, it is a good option. Yeah. And it works. I mean, it just broadcast it right into your soybeans as soon as they start to yellow so that the seed can get sunlight.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that everyone needs to recognize is that, certain plants do better in certain situations when you broadcast them. If you think about, the way that nature replicates itself is seed drops on the ground. Now, if you put a flush amount of seed that does well, without, I guess, having a depth issue. Beans are probably, and corn are probably good examples where you need a little depth to them. But other plants like oats or, winter rye or wheat, what have you, just as an example, clover does well, brassica does well. Heavy rains, put those seeds at the right depth or minimal depth in order to survive and kind of develop that taproot. The point being is, when you think about plants, every plant around here sends out a seed. And in most instances, those seeds sit resident on the soil. So the idea that you have to till soil to allow that plant to develop is kind of, it's plant specific, but it's not an essential. And I think getting away from the idea of tillage, and that's kind of been my promotion here, what we've started is really you can just throw stuff on the ground and it grows. That's how nature does it, right? Acorns, right? They eventually get planted or they seep into the ground, but they start at the soil, and that taproot, kind of grows. I watched beans this year on open ground develop. Forward soybeans develop into a plant that I just threw on the ground. So that's a plant that typically has a depth, rate that people would say, is half an inch deep, and you'll get the best results. Sure. So if I overwhelm the seed bank with 50% more seed than I need, I guarantee 50% of that's probably going to grow based on those conditions. So I have to overwhelm the seed bank to get to where I'm at. But I'm telling you, you can create a pretty productive forward soybean plot by just throwing stuff on the ground. And that would be probably the extreme example of what I'm talking about. Corn, I've done the same thing. So, I'm just saying that don't think that tillage is an essential.
It just has to be on the soil. That's the point there. When people think of on the ground, you can't throw those kind of plants on top of dead weeds and thatch and things like that. They need to actually be on the soil. But other than that, as long as they're sitting on the soil, yeah. We had a soybean field from last year that we took out of production that food plot that we talked about in the winter that we said we were going to stop growing. And there's a bunch of volunteer soybean plants coming up there. They're scattered all over the field, just volunteer seeds that just from the pods from last year.
Yeah. And you get really minute. You can look at like buckwheat. We're bringing buckwheat again. The spacing between buckwheat, is that where you've got a lot of usually open ground? It does create a great weed mat. It's not the same weed mat as rye or wheat, but and it degrades at a faster rate depending on when you terminate it. But you'll see there's enough open soil or available soil where that is easily able to make contact with the soil. And generally speaking, that's kind of what we're doing.
Emma, what are you doing?
I'm here too.
Oh, you are here? Okay. Do you have anything to say about seed to soil contact?
Like I know anything about that.
How many days did you help with food plots this year?
Well,
more than me.
Yeah, more than Billy. She did more with food plot work than Billy so far this year.
I know. I talk for a living. So I want to hit on something here because I haven't seen any other, and Jimmy can pipe in if there's any questions we've missed, but I want to hit on this. One of the things that's really I've seen developing, and I'm seeing everybody, all three of you guys on this call, and Tyler Breen just hopped on. He's in the live feed talking, and I just seen a video that Tyler posted maybe last weekend that I think is a very important point here, is that are we all very passionate about deer hunting? Yes. But we're trying to create the best habitat for wildlife on our properties that we have access to hunt, whether we own it or as family property, whatever it is. So, you know, I'm seeing these fields of all these variations of different plants and different things. And you have some of your crops with the beans and the corn, but then you're getting into all this other stuff that we're planting in these fields, and it's incredible habitat. And the video that Tyler put up, he was talking about the benefit to the turkey populations with having such a thick, you know, tall standing grasses and mixture of things. And you guys can speak way more intelligently than I can to that. But I think, John, you've talked about it, and having, you know, a smorgasbord of stuff for the deer to eat, for turkeys, for everything else. And they don't want to just go and feed on clover for 8 hours at night. They want to go and pick around. It's like a salad bar. They want to try a little bit of everything. So can you guys just kind of, I guess, John, we'll start with you, kind of talk about that principle of, you know, what we've kind of been talking about tonight, is that you're trying to create the best possible habitat, not just for deer, but for wildlife. And that all starts in the ground, really.
Yeah. So it's a full ecology kind of, you know, philosophy, right? You're developing a system of high fertility soil, and you can make soil more fertile. Any type of soil, low CEC soil, low organic matter, all those things that are negative, you can build up that soil. If you have sandy soil, the strategy is a little bit different than clay soil. It's a little different from loamy soil. So, you know, what I would say is that if you build the right prescription of plants and you plan, you can easily change the interest level. So I have a soybean plot. They never plant soybeans, but they did a cash crop this year down the road. I got this little food plot in my backyard. I got more deer in my backyard than I do in that soybean plot. Why is that? Because the plants that I've planted provide different fractions or factors of interest, because they provide different compounds, nutrients, secondary compounds. There's elements to those that are feeding the deer's palate and feeding the deer's nutrition. Okay. And that is the difference in these diverse blends. And it doesn't have to be complicated. I did the Fall Foodplot podcast with you guys before, and I gave blends to everybody. And I've broken it down, most of my clients, between 8 to 15 species. You break it down between broadleafs, legumes, right? Grasses and brassicas. Have 2 of each. Figure out your warm and your cool season, okay? And that's how you develop your food plots. Balance carbon and nitrogen ratios. And I know it sounds complicated, but really that's all you're working with. And figuring out in that system, can you roll it? Can you crimp it? Can you run a tiller over it to knock it down? Can you run a truck over it? And then can you broadcast the next seed into that? And it's just kind of planning ahead of those things. It's not much more complicated than that. You do not have to have a, you know, soil degree from, you know, wherever, Texas A&M, in order to be successful here. I mean, I've done it for 6 years, and I learned every step of the way. And sometimes, you know, you screw up, and you know, but I think it's a little bit less involved. And I think I break it down really simply to people, but just remember that every plant has a unique benefit. They complement each other. And I think people should be aware of that rather than dumping synthetics. And I think you can really dumb it down. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. And it's just, you're putting seed in the soil and you overwhelm the soil with various seeds in the seed bank, and respectively, you get good results as a benefit to that. So it's pretty simple.
Ben, you got anything on that? I know you're buddies with Tyler. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that video he posted, if you would see the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I actually put a video up myself of when I almost ran over a hen turkey with all of our poults up there in one of our fields that we're letting the winter wheat stand. But yeah, like to John's point, not planting, I mean, I'm a little bit more, I guess, guilty of it than John. John's mad scientist with some of his blends and stuff. I'm pretty bare bones. A lot of my stuff's got, like, especially my fall blends, like 4 or 5 different things in it. But, John's talking 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, whatever different species in there. I just haven't got that in depth with it, I guess. My bases are kind of covered with, like John said, you got a legume, whether that's a clover or something like that, that's a nitrogen fixer, a grain, and then broadleaf like a brassica or something like that in with it. You can cover your points. But yeah, like John was saying too, with the peaking interest levels with that, like I love before the farmers, I mean, you can't really find a standing winter wheat field unless you left one yourself right now, but I love glassing velvet bucks in the neighborhood in a winter wheat field. Like John says, they start looking for different stuff that's peaking in different plants at different times. And that winter wheat, they turn on to it like crazy. But that's right around harvest time when that winter wheat peaks out and all those nutrients that they're craving at that time. And then you switch back over to glass and soybeans and alfalfa in the neighborhood. So
hey Ben, can you talk about why the deer eat winter wheat and like what you're planting? Because I think people don't recognize like what are they eating on the winter wheat and why, what selection of winter wheat?
Yeah, so I talked about that in my video a little bit too. So there's 2 basic types of winter wheat. There's an awnless and an awned variety. And I got kind of a visual video in my on my YouTube channel if you wanted to check that out that I just put up. But basically the awned wheat has the stiff guard hairs coming off the top. And I like to tell people that it's like an awning coming off the top, awned. And then the awnless wheat doesn't have as many stiff guard hairs, or they're really fine and really short. And stay tuned because I'll probably put a video up here soon where I have like half of a field that's kind of an awnless and one side that's an awned, and the awnless side is already disappearing at a much, much faster rate than the awned side. And it's really cool to watch them selectively forage on that. I think it's because of a comfort thing with their chewing. I don't think there's much of a nutritional difference with it, but I think that's more of a comfort thing. But if you just have awned and that's all you can get your hands on, I wouldn't hesitate to plant it because they will eat it. So my winter wheat, like I said, I'm letting that stand. Squirrels are hitting it really hard right now, a lot more than normal this year. For some reason, it looks like turkeys too. They kind of bat it down and work it over. But the deer, they come right through and, clean it right off. And I got some great illustrations in that video I just put up. But that's hitting a protein bump. That gets up, I want to say around 18 or 19% protein. Somewhere in that kind of ballpark. I forget what the exact number is. Probably varies on your, varietal or whatever. But then it bumps in a lot of stuff like good fiber, good digestible fiber, everything like that else in it. So it's a really good crop. I've leaned on winter wheat. That was some of the first plots we put in the early, I don't know, like 2004 or 5. Me and Dad were talking the other day when we started putting our first plots in. They were just winter wheat because that's what farmers had around, and you could get your hands on it for $5 a bag back then. So.
Is protein vitally important, I would think, to build an antler size? No. Just
look
body
at your
mass.
look at your native forages around right now. All these guys that tote 30-40% protein in a clover or a bean. Look at ragweed, look at pokeweed, for Pete's sakes. I mean, there's tons of stuff like that in the natural landscape. Does it help? I'd say I guess it could help, and stuff like that, but it's not, you don't need to plant high protein stuff. There's tons of stuff out in the native habitat right now that's got more than enough nutritional requirements to feed that protein thing. So I would say it depends more like on calcium and other, trace minerals than protein.
Yeah, so let me give you the deer antler thing, because I was talking to somebody about this recently, and I want to clarify a point, because I think people that follow NDA and get the magazine, they say, okay, well, why are they feeding on certain plants? And a lot of people focus on the protein levels, amino acids, nitrogen, those type of components of those plants. So when deer go into antler building mode, big bucks are all deer that are producing antlers. Their bodies, the calcium, the phosphorus comes from their bones. Their bones propagate the antlers, okay? The replenishment of that calcium and phosphorus happens previously in the winter period. So through that fall and winter period, the calcium composition of some of these plants, kale. I'm a big kale component because kale has a high grade of calcium. If we can bump up the physique of that deer, now let's just focus on they meet their they meet their metabolism needs, and they survive wintertime, and they come into the springtime kind of well nourished, and you're providing a whole bunch of calcium and phosphorus based on the plants that you're feeding them. You are going, as a result of that, going to get better antler growth. There's no doubt about it. They're like, why are the preferences? They're focusing on crude protein, digestible fibers, which is important because the animal has to digest it. Ruminant has to process it. But it's calcium that is the contributor. I'm very surprised the NDA hasn't picked up on that, because I've looked at nutritional studies on Texas A&M, and that's something that they've triggered on. So plants high in calcium, or plants high in micronutrients like calcium, will be absolutely beneficial to the deer. Now, they get that from all sorts of plants, but I just gave you an example, kale. But the brassica family is typically broccoli, right? That's why we eat broccoli. It's got a huge volume of calcium. That really, to me, is it's not a hypothetical. That's reality, and that's why deer choose that plant matter as a select source. Like I said, brassicas are huge in the winter months, and reason being is the plants produce the volume of micronutrients that deer need to be successful in growing big antlers. So think about that a little bit more than some of these other studies that you're seeing are coming out, because they're like, oh, why is it more palatable? Why is it interesting? And by the way, they get it from other natural food sources as well. It just doesn't come from the plants like we're talking about with kale, et cetera. So just take note of that.
Yeah, and you'll see them across the landscape. If you start really looking at what deer are eating at different times of the year, you'll see them completely like shift off of different plants and shift on to other stuff throughout the year. And I'm sure it's like John said, it's connected to the nutrient needs and requirements at that time, especially those that are nursing too. I mean, they need tons of calcium to be put into them fawns. I mean, you name it. The protein is a very minute but overplayed thing, in my opinion, the whole protein hype. I think it really is.
The animal has nutritional wisdom. I mean, you can debate that all you want, but the animal has nutritional wisdom. They know what they need, and they select based on that. They don't just select based on palatability. They focus on nutritional need. And the deer in our areas are susceptible to obviously tough winters. And, majority of the time we're focused on antler growth. I mean, right now, the bucks are starting to reach kind of pinnacle. I would say 80% antler growth. We're kind of in that phase, 70, 80% antler growth. The needs are different today, but you establish that antler growth in the fall and through the winter months. I mean, it's a totally different, mindset. People think we're feeding today for antlers. You fed 6 months ago, 8 months ago for those antlers. And that's kind of really the here and now of where we're at today. So the plants that I'm planting in the fall need to be focused on kind of those winter needs that the deer have. And again, that's just not supplemental feeds in a food plot. We're talking about how I manage a forest setting for their interests and needs. And that's a totally different discussion than food plots today.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we can definitely get into again. Jimbo just dropped a question in here. Ending that thought before I hit this quick. I think there's been a couple good questions in there about that that are more like timber related. So I think that's a whole nother discussion. I don't want to dive into that right now, but possibly something we could do once we get closer to the end of deer season, maybe when you start getting into your timber to start doing work like that. Jimmy's question, quick hitter here. Can you plant grains with brassicas? And that was from Bo Hunt. And Ben, I think you just said that, but I think he wanted to clarify because he was not under the impression you could do that.
You can, species dependent. You're not going to get big bulb yield and stuff like that in some of your bulb type brassica type species, planting them side by side in a blend. And also just keep in mind your seeding rates. If your turnip is 8 pounds per acre and your grain is, let's just say 100 pounds per acre for a round figure, you don't put 100 pounds of grain in with 8 pounds of turnips. You have to supplement to get your full acre planting. If you overseed and put an acre and an acre on 1 acre, you put 2 acres of seed on 1 acre. So that's just something to consider too. You can do it. You just have to make sure your blends and stuff are blended with that. And your timing is a little bit different, with your grains to brassica. So sometimes I'll put my brassicas out and then I'll overseed a couple weeks later with a grain over the top too. I do that a lot. More so like in bare spots and stuff like that when I'm putting into a brassica blend with it. But that's just my experience with doing it. But you can definitely get a lack of bulb growth by putting them in too thick for sure. Or overseeding just in general.
I think to Ben's point, totally 100% agree. Think about the size of that plant when it matures. Then again, and I'm gonna be very clear about this because I think the folks, you listen to Jeff Sturgis, and the only reason I bring this up is I've been asked this question 5 times in the past month, brassica and grains. Okay, I plant brassicas and grains. In fact, I would plant more on the grain side than the brassica side. I just went through this whole rendition of calcium and phosphorus. Forget that for a second. The plant gets X amount of big, based on the soil fertility. Okay. Let's say it's about $1 in size. A grain, let's just pick oats, for example. The stem of that's about the size of a quarter. Okay. So if you're interseeding plants, okay, and then dispersing them. So when you buy a bag of seed that's all intermixed, your seeding rate is important. Your application across the landscape is important. That's why I buy my seed separately. I don't buy all seed mixed together. I would never do that. And I don't recommend that. Get with your local ag store, buy your big seed separate, buy your small seed separate, and apply it separately. It'll evenly distribute across the landscape. Reduce your rates like Ben said. And by the way, why would I plant a brassica blend that will be bare ground? It's very nitrogen based. It degrades, it decomposes at a very high rate. And then I go into the spring and I have bare fields. Bad decision. Absolute horrible decision. I don't mean to be very blunt about this, but I've seen that time and time again. Don't do this, have this separate. I absolutely don't agree with that because I want resident crops, 3, 4, 5 that survive through that winter period that are hardy and basically are resident on the soil. So I don't use or lose kind of my basically arming the soil, the basic tenets that we talked about earlier. A living root, those type of things. And I'm kind of maintaining the structure and integrity of that soil by having plant life active on it. So please don't listen to Jeff Sturgis. I hate to say that, but that's a wrong recommendation. And I'm only saying that because I'm sick of people asking me the question, but thanks for asking the question.
Yep. No such thing as stupid questions, just stupid answers, John.
There we go.
Yep. All right, I'm just going to answer this quick. It was a question in the chat that I just answered directly, but Jimbo thinks that it'd be good for me just to hit on this quick. Dumb down what it means to roller crimp and seed before crimping. So what that means when you're roller crimping something. I always had a hard time understanding what a crimper was. So you can actually physically buy a crimper. There's a lot of the old school ones, the big solid, whether they're ceramic or steel, whatever they are. Farmers use them, kind of look like they're corrugated metal almost. And that gives you more of a crushing action rather than a rolling like a lawn roller would do. So you could do it with a lawn roller, but it's not as effective because you're not breaking the stem of the plant, which is killing it and laying it down to create that bed for you to have your new seed grow up in. So crimping, I would definitely recommend anybody to just go on Google and search what crimping is. There's a lot of really cool tools and crimpers that are out there now that you can purchase, but you can certainly, you don't have to have one. But if you're going to try to not spray, like John and Ben said, you're going to definitely want a crimper that's actually going to cut that vein in that plant to kill it off. So
yeah, and if you're interested in buying crimpers, I got a guy who designs them or designed mine and sells them. So you get a discount. You know, they're pretty expensive, but he's pretty reasonable. And you don't need a crimper. I'll give you one bit of information I've been really happy about seeing is I saw an individual take a rototiller on the back of the tractor and use it as a crimper. And I thought that was genius. I spent all this money on a crimper and he's running a tiller, not turning it on via PTO, but just running it over the crop. He's already got a tiller. You know, I think to myself, I spent all this money designing this unit and that worked just as well. So, you know, you got options, you know, tiller works. It's not as efficient as my machine, but it does the job, right? We're just trying to crush and kill off the vascular system.
Like, I'm wondering if that one that we have for behind the 4-wheeler, Dallas, if that would work, you know, to almost knock it down with the roller and then just take that tiller without any weight on it and just drive it over the top of that stuff. I think that
I would say, depending on your biomass, the unit's got to weigh at least 500 pounds, 400 to 500 pounds. So consider that, you know, just to get the right amount of, you know, kind of just point mass on that particular stem. So, okay. Yep.
So the answer to that question is negative.
The other part of that question, I think, was the order. So what we're saying is when you have standing vegetation, you broadcast your seed into it so that it can make its way down through the vegetation and get to the soil. Then you do whatever you need to do to get all that living stuff down on top of it and kill it. And then the vegetation that you kill and lay down on top of the seed acts as like a layer of soil. But the seed needs to get down first so that it can get to the soil before you start knocking down any plants.
Well said,
It
Dallas.
won't work otherwise.
Yeah. No, you answered that better than I did. Shocker. All right. We are over an hour, and I said I was going to try to keep this to an hour. So I want to be good with everyone's time. And if I'm sure there's more in here that we will review and make sure that if we didn't answer anything, we get to it. But there's a lot
I can go to 10.
I can go to 10 too. It's 10 minutes. And I know we wouldn't have a hard time talking any further about that stuff. So I guess, why don't we just go around the horn and maybe talk, each one of you three, about what you're doing, what you're going to do this year. We've talked enough about ideas and stuff, but just hit on what your plans are for your fall food plots and your stuff that you're planting to take you through the winter. So Dallas, why don't we start with you on that, what we've got going at the farm and what your game plan is here over the next 3-4 weeks.
Well, we have a lot going on. We have a lot of food plots and we have a lot of different variations of them. And I'm trying to incorporate the corn planter in as much as I can. So one thing I'm going to plan on doing is trying to use that again here in August and go into standing vegetation, be it buckwheat or another mix. And I'm going to drill in. We have a lot of soybeans left over, and then I'm thinking of using Austrian winter peas as well, and maybe a combination of those two and get some broadleafs going before, and then broadcast brassicas in as well, and then roll down over top of that. The other idea that I've been playing with is in the corn and soybean fields, which I mix. So I alternate rows, either 1 row or 2 row of corn and soybeans. I'm actually following up on a farm cover crop technique, which is interseeding cover crops into the corn during the summer while they're growing. So I use this rain to our advantage and broadcast a combination of clovers and brassicas into the corn. I know John's going to have something to say about this. So that's something that we're experimenting with. And then on top of that, we'll probably add some cereal grains into that stuff later in the fall. So I'm interested to hear what John's opinion is on that, because he was kind of smiling as I was talking about it. So
I had a client call me. We've had a big debate over this summer. So this is funny to me. So my seed guy, who's a big farmer here locally, he has been doing the same thing as you're doing. He's running around throwing, seed on the ground and, timing the rain in it. My opinion is on the edges, and depending on your row spacing, it's sensible. Obviously, I think planning ahead and figuring out what the appropriate row spacing would be to kind of have that interseeding be productive, to me makes a lot of sense. I think if you're going to go into a corn system, and like me, it's throw and grow, you really don't have the ability to do that unless your spacing is conducive to that. But I worry because you go into the winter months and you've got these corn stalks and you've just got this exposed soil. And I think there's potential, depending on how your spacing is, to really have that interseeding work really, really well. Typically, they're using tillage radish and some type of grain. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's complementary. But at the same point, I just think that you got to plan ahead on that type of stuff. We're talking 30-inch rows minimally. And then in the corn, where are you going to get the benefit? Usually on the edges of the corn. So, kind of got to weigh that into the equation. I don't think you're wasting time, but I think you're going to get a short-lived crop that's going to be eventually shaded out. So I kind of wonder really what you're getting out of that. And that's the big fight we've been having between ourselves of, is it worth the time and effort to do that? So that's what I caution everybody on. I like the idea though. I really do.
So in my case, I don't have a monoculture corn crop. I've got the soybeans that are letting the light in as well. And I don't know if our soybeans are even going to canopy, because of the fact that I don't know if it's browse or what, but we're just not getting tall soybeans. So I've got extra sunlight in there, which is part of the reason I planted the way I did.
Is it a forage bean or not? Is it forage?
No, it's the NDA beans. I wanted to buy forage soybeans this year, but at $85 a bag as opposed to $15, we just went with the NDA. And then we got a bunch of free stuff on top of that from my cousin that he gave us a bunch of leftover soybeans. So we just decided it was more economical to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, I don't know. I'm interested to hear what Ben thinks about this, because I mean, this has been a topic for me recently, and I don't want to provide some recommendation that people don't think is fair, but that's my opinion.
Right, and I've never done the interseeding like that you're talking about with like a grain or clover or brassica mixed in with it. Like John said, you're gonna have to get into some seriously spaced rows, and I just out around me, I don't see farmers going that wide with rows. It's all about bushels per acre. So I don't see any of that wide row stuff anymore. The last couple organic guys that used to run cultivators all the time are gone. So the big wide rows aren't something I see a lot. I have done beans and corn, drilled side by side. And that works fairly well. But it's tough. I mean, if you have high deer density soybeans, unless you're putting in, I would even say 5 to 6 acres, a solid 5 to 6 acres, you're not going to get much of a yield off of your beans, unless you fence them. And that's just deer pressure. It has been lighter in some years when we've tried it, but that's why we switched away from doing that and leaning on our grains. Like John said, I love winter wheat. That's always been my go-to. It's been more readily available than rye just because of the soil type we have here. The wheat is grown readily by local farmers, so it's always available for us. And then oats, I like oats mixed in with my clovers and stuff like that for early season draws. But yeah, I'm curious on how that interseeding goes, because once that corn gets up, I mean, out by me right now, it's 6 foot tall, some of the corn.
Yeah.
So, that's casting a lot of shade on any of those crops in there. So
I can tell you a little bit more of the idea on that is the idea with it is you get your plants to establish with the sunlight, and then they'll actually go dormant until the corn turns brown and starts to let sunlight back in there. But another point on the soybeans is that I know my deer are going to browse my soybeans. I don't care, because I'm just going to go and put a fall cover over it anyways, whether it be the interseeding or the additional fall cover. I'll go through there and hit it with rye or wheat on top of that. So my point is, I don't care if they want to crush the soybeans, let them do it. They'll come into those food plots. We'll get pictures of them all summer long. We'll get inventory out of it. Deer like soybeans. I'm going to let them eat them. I don't really care. That's what I'm planting for is for deer. Right. So,
right.
I'm not because I'm not going to have a monoculture of just soybeans and have a total loss and say, oh no, I planted a food plot and it didn't work out. Right. So I'm just going to let them eat them.
I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is, so when I'm designing properties, right, and I'm thinking about the corn soybean rotation, I want swaths of corn, swath of soybean, and I'm looking at the resident trees, shrubs, whatever, and actually plants to figure out how they're shading each other out, right? So that will kind of, and based on the orientation of that food plot, that'll design how I lay out that particular setup. That's the way I'm thinking. What I'm thinking about interseeding within corn, I think potentially, and I don't know this for sure, but I think that a good percentage of that, whatever you're putting in their grain crop, isn't going to survive the canopy of the corn. And you're not going to get, as it dries, you're not going to get that to replenish itself just based upon it being resident there. So, I mean, you may get some of it. I just don't think you'll get the full benefit of it. But it's so damn cheap. I mean, what I'm spending $15 for a bag of cereal rye right now. $15 or $18 for a bag of oats right now. I mean, it's cheap. It's relatively cheap. So I think it's a great experiment. I think in the beans, it makes more sense. Just my thinking about it, especially with you're talking about determinate beans. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think the corn, I just have a hard time with the corn, but what do I know?
Oh no, believe me, I've had all these same thoughts, and actually a lot of my corn, I was telling you off, before we really got started here, a lot of my corn's not going to get that big. It's not even going to canopy over some of it. So that I'm also hedging against a corn failure here. And it'd be nice to, if the corn fails, it'd be nice to have clover already established going into the fall, because that'll give them something else to eat and to cover that soil. I don't want that bare soil. So it's the whole thing. Like, sense to me. Yeah. I really want standing corn going into the late season, both for hunting and for the deer to eat after the season is over. I want that, but I don't want just a cornfield. I want to have diversity growing through that whole cornfield. I want corn to just, maybe that's the main draw for the deer, but I want all that soil to be covered and something growing in there all winter long. So if I get started on that on July 1st, then I figure I'm that far ahead of the game for later on.
Yeah, I'm very rarely recommending soybean plantings on anybody's property. I'm not an advocate for soybeans, at least in a monoculture system. I think it's a bad decision, and there's a lot of reason why. And I think it's a debatable topic, but I think, when it comes down to it, the snow load, the areas that we hunt, the volume of carbohydrate that's kind of present with a corn planting, I think provides a longer term and better benefit to the deer, at least in traction and interest point, and then complementing it exactly with the plants that you're talking about. I think it's completely sensible. That's exactly what I would recommend. So I'm with you 100%.
Dallas, I'm proud of you. We're blessed to have you, that, and it makes me happy to have you challenge these two experts.
I'm not challenging. We're just having a conversation. But the one more point about corn and soybeans is that even if everybody thinks that standing soybeans pods are the best late season food. I've watched many, many deer walk right through my standing soybean food plot and into combine corn and picking up the waste grain. I've shot two of my biggest bucks like that. They walked right past the soybeans and started picking up waste grain out of the corn. So they generally prefer the corn. What they'll do is after they eat up all that waste grain, they'll go back and eat the soybeans, or when the ground freezes or snows over so that they can't get the waste corn out of the ground, they'll go back to the soybeans, but they prefer that corn.
Go back to the volume. Just look at the actual volume,
per bite
comparatively, right? The production quality and quantity is that of corn, right? Corn is the king. Yeah. I don't care what anybody says. I think corn is king. But, there's a little bit of a negative to planting corn that I think people need to consider is what is it really doing for the soil, right? How much nutrients is it taking up, right? I mean, it's not falling into that categorization that we're talking about. Is you can't roller crimp it. So you're going to have all this resident corn stubble. Now, interseeding makes a lot of sense in those examples. Maybe interseed later into the season if you can keep the spacing correct, like to Ben's point. And I think you get a lot more benefit out of it. But I don't have a planner, right? So I'm just broadcasting it at an interval that I think is appropriate based upon the type of seed that I'm putting out, per acre. So, it's kind of uncontrolled. So it's different for everybody, and everybody's equipment, is different. So that impacts you big time.
Well, you use the phrase corn is king, and that's the one that I used this spring. And that was a big part of the reason why we have a corn planter, because I've lived in dairy country my whole life and corn is king. But as you said, corn does nothing but take from the soil. It does not give anything back. And so you need to be able to add in, but you either have to be prepared to put down synthetic fertilizer and lime every year, or you need to find another way to use cover crops. And, I was telling you before how my corn is growing great where I had brassicas and grains growing last fall. The corn is doing phenomenal with no synthetic inputs. So you just a cornfield is not really the best for anything that we're talking about here as far as food plots. You need to be able to add other crops to it.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't have said it better, because I use corn to shrink fields. I use it to screen on the areas that I'm not accessing. But again, like to that point, I mean, I think, yes, corn is king. Corn is a consumer. Corn does exchange, assuming you have other plants resident with it, which you normally don't. So you only get that exchange companionship of phosphorus between the two plants if they're adjacent to each other. And that's a strip, right? That's not normally conducive to. So and how do you deal with the residue? There's a lot to deciding to plant corn and the benefit of it. I think people are best served with going into these multi-species blend and not necessarily focused on corn. Although I planted corn. So, I know what you experienced, because I experienced the same thing when I was a kid with corn.
Corn is king. All right, let's wrap her up. I think we're all getting tired, and we're about an hour and a half. So thank you guys for jumping on here. We may revisit a few things. We might get back on here again before September, October, but John from Whitetail Landscapes, thank you for jumping on. Ben from Old Tin Cup, and Uncle Dallas, the third generation deer farmer. We appreciate you being on here tonight. So thank you guys. Good luck to everybody who's getting ready to start doing their work in the field. And if, like these guys said, if you have any questions, they would be the ones to answer them, not me, clearly. So thanks, everybody. Have a good night and keep feeding them.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.